We're going to talk about workforce today, and actually both Jeremy and Melissa stole some good punchlines of mine. So I was busily rewriting some of my comments as I listened to their two talks. I do want to talk about this maybe at a little bit more fundamental level and at a level that's more directly related to how I think as employers and as a group of employers we need to think about this as opposed to broad macro themes. But I do want to just introduce two or three basic truths about the workforce today in the United States that are the foundation off of which I'm going to build my suggestions as to what you need to do as employers and what you need to do as an industry association. There are three fundamental trends in the workforce that I just want to highlight for you. The first we've touched on, and Jeremy began to allude to it, which is that work that is routine in nature is rapidly being diminished in the workforce of the United States. And by routine I mean the parameters in which that work varies is sufficiently limited so you can define it in a contract and outsource it to a vendor who may be in Cleveland or may be in Guangdong. You can write code for it. You can program a robot to do it. So 30 years ago, 56% of work in the United States fell under the classification of routine. Today it's 44%. And in workforce demographics, that's light speed. Now, many people in this room either contributed to that, or know people did, or maybe your older brothers and sisters did, or your aunts and uncles, or your parents, because where did all those men in gray flannel suits that used to answer the phone to HR go? Onto PeopleSoft. So this rapid elimination of particularly more expensive workers who do routine work, because of course that's where the payback is investing in an entrepreneurial startup or investing in capital or code to substitute for the worker as that one-time employer. The second change in the workforce is that the jobs that are growing have a significant social component to it. Machines don't emote. Code doesn't emote. I suppose emojis are supposed to, but if you look at all the most profound recent research, especially by my colleague Professor David Deming at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, across the income spectrum, the jobs that are growing in numbers are those that have some social component. Now that, I don't mean Toastmasters, but I mean the ability to engage somebody you've never met before productively, the ability to have some empathy for their position. By that I also don't mean, oh, they're probably having a bad day, but that person is looking at sweaters and looks confused. I should go help them to see if I can help overcome their confusion. That person dropped their Starbucks in walking out. I should immediately start making a replacement for her. That type of social engagement. These are often captured in a very broad and somewhat condescendingly named category of skills called soft skills. I prefer to call them foundation skills because they're not soft, they're not easy. They require considerable acculturation, and one of the many advantages that more affluent young people have in the United States is they've often had more of those acculturating experiences that allow them to be more productive in alien settings more quickly. The third big change in the workforce is what I'm going to call hybridization, which is rather than having a linear progression where you learn a skill and become more and more refined at it, more and more jobs require capabilities that combine 2 or 3 skill sets. So what is the fastest growing characteristic being sought for registered nurses in the United States? Additional academic qualification beyond actually having a nursing degree? Anyone want to guess? Computer science background. So you're supposed to be a registered nurse and you're supposed to be a computer scientist. There are no such people, right? But the nature of the work is changing. So if you had someone who could do both those things, they'd be ideally productive for it. 49% of the top quartile jobs in the United States require not just computer literacy, but some type of programming literacy. Now, I'm not talking about Tableau, right? I'm talking about I can build complex Excel. But it's 49% of the top quartile. Bottom quartile is 10%. So this kind of hybridization, growth of the need for social skills, and relentless suppression of high-wage routine work, i.e. the suppression of the work that many Trump voters once had or expected to have, are three big trends I want you to keep in mind. They all add up to something which is a growing bias toward hiring people with advanced degrees. So Jeremy referred to it. At the height of the 2008 recession, demand for college graduates in the United States grew. So at the absolute trough of the recession, we had added net 183,000 college graduate jobs. We destroyed 8.4 million non-college graduate jobs. 2/3 weighted toward non-post-secondary degree holders, the other third being junior college or some college. Since the end of the recession, I was very impressed. Jeremy had the numbers almost exactly right. We added about 8.4 million college jobs. We've added about 1.3 million junior college or some college jobs, and we've added 80,000 high school jobs. So everybody is after the same people. Now we've got some grim news for you.
We haven't heard any of that today.
Yeah, and it's not that Mookie Betts didn't win the MVP award. It is that the supply of quality college graduates in the United States is stagnant. Pardon me?
What do you mean by quality?
Right. They come from a selective institution. You have to, you don't get in by applying. So 2/3 of the seats in post-secondary education in the United States, if you apply, you're admitted. What do you think the admissions rate is for the 100th most selective college in the United States? Yeah, the 100th most selective. I'm not talking Harvard or Stanford or MIT, number 100. 35%. When you get to 179, you're close to admitting everybody. There are 1,007 four-year degree granting institutions in the United States. There are about 3,500 post-secondary degree graduating institutions in the United States. If you go to a four-year college, only 54% of all kids that enroll in a four-year college have graduated within 6 years. Only 17% of four-year degree granting institutions in the United States graduate 75% of their students within 6 years. So there are a large number of post-secondary institutions that are not selective to gain admissions for, and that don't actually generate graduates. And a very high percentage of the people that do graduate from certain colleges, and I don't have time to go into the data. If you want to talk to me about it in the break or in the afternoon, I'm happy to. Actually create people who they have a degree in a discipline, but they're not job ready. About 2/3 of employers say that they have brought in college graduates and they need significant remedial work. So we've got a pattern here of a post-secondary industry that effectively is essentially a perpetual motion machine, but what it works at is matriculating people and getting them to allocate their student loan capacity or their Pell Grant capacity to the institution because those institutions survive on tuition. And there's no incentive. We have accredited 74% of the four-year degree granting institutions in the United States would be treated as failing school districts under the No Child Left Behind standard, were they held to the same graduation thresholds that we apply at high schools in terms of how quickly they graduate people. So we have a big industry that lives on your tax dollars, student loan dollars, and Pell Grant dollars. The cost of that institution has gone up 7% compounded a year for the last 20 years. So have tuitions. So we keep enticing people either take a lot of loans or to borrow for their kids to get a degree, degrees that by and large aren't what people think they are in terms of the economic prospects they're going to yield. Now, as employers, what does that mean we can start thinking about? What is infuriating about this topic is we know what works. We just don't do it because there are a lot of entrenched interests. The first thing that works is to get high school age kids, early high school age kids, 14, 15-year-olds, some experience to some exposure to a place of work. That type of exposure does two things. There are a lot of effects which I'm happy to talk to you about once again in the break. One is it gives them a sense of why they're going to high school. People leave high school or don't apply themselves in high school because they don't know why they're there. And as just a quick vignette, there's the biggest wire manufacturer in the United States is called Southwire, appropriately down south. And the CEO of Southwire will tell you his Ford F-150 story, which is when they get a high school kid to visit a Southwire facility and that kid sees that the older brother of a classmate of theirs who they always thought was a knucklehead has a brand new F-150, they're really interested in working at Southwire. And they're really figured out that learning what it's going to take to get a job at a place like Southwire, and Southwire telling you, you have to graduate from high school to get this job, now I get it. So Boston's a fascinating city in this because of things like the Private Industry Council, Jobs for the Future here, Harvard Ed School. There's really a whole kind of skills ecosystem here, skills process ecosystem. And we know that pathways type programs, the one I just talked about, work. The second thing we know that works is not enticing kids to start studying something they have no aptitude for. We have to be very, very careful about this. All you have to do is learn how to be a coder. Being a crappy coder doesn't pay. So, and by the way, what courses have the highest dropout rate in four-year colleges? Introductory science courses, including computer science. They are actually statistically the hardest course. Anyone want to guess what the major for someone who starts in a STEM concentration and then drops out of that and switches to another concentration college, what major they shift to? Political science, business, psychology. You want to know what the highest average grade point major is in colleges? Psychology. So if you're smart enough to get into college and you've picked up a couple of D's in calculus and introduction to computer science, you're smart enough to figure out I better take the easiest major I can find to start building that grade point average back up. In any case, so we've got to be extremely careful about that. And one thing that's very, very discouraging, by the way, is a phenomenon of what's called malemployment of people who have college degrees that end up in jobs that don't require a college degree, but in the meantime they've accumulated a bunch of debt and gotten older. The big debt crisis, by the way, is not kids with $100,000 in debt. That's extraordinarily rare and almost always associated with PhDs or MDs who have a vehicle for financing it. It's all about kids who start college, borrow money, and don't finish college and end up in the same type of $25,000 a year job they could have had if they started working 3 years earlier, except now they own $20,000. Oh, and by the way, if they still owe the school money, that school will not transfer their record to another school until they're paid. So it's blackmail. But the other thing that has to happen here is employers have to take much more active part in the system. What I'm going to suggest to you is you have to start thinking about creating your own talent pipelines. just relying on the spot market, someone is supposed to come out of the high school system and just present themselves and be job ready, given both the level of competition that there's going to be for college graduates who that college credential is actually consistent with the types of skills you think you're going to get, that there are going to be 2 to 3 million jobs in 2022 where there's no one to fill that job and it requires that type of degree. So unless you think we're going to get a sensible points-based immigration policy, we're going to stock out. And you better find a way to get people that are coming into your company seamlessly, whether it's through internships or something else I want to mention in a second, that is going to give you an advantage to get that person. And you better start thinking about how you're going to redefine things like career paths and job descriptions so that you're preferable to the slower oryx in the pack, because the lions are going to get, the lionesses actually are going to get the slow oryx in terms of the ones that change or don't change. The other thing I want to talk to you about is very esoteric, but it's strictly essential. And actually this Brace for Impact might be a positive of a Trump administration, which is a fundamental revisitation of what's called Title IV. Title IV is the system of accrediting institutions in the United States. And the Obama administration, to their everlasting credit, bucked the trend and did an experiment that's ongoing called EQUIP. And what EQUIP does is essentially take an accredited institution and allow them to partner with a non-traditional education provider to develop curriculum. So Flatiron is working with SUNY Saratoga Springs to create web-based programmers. And Market Square is working with UT Austin to create web developers. And GE, new game in town, is working with Northeastern to create advanced manufacturing engineers. Now what happens here? What happens is Northeastern is effectively a pass-through, where they're taking like 20% off the top, they're handing to the kid to GE who's doing like 90% of the curriculum. That's the future. That's the future. We can't keep counting on academics who often in your disciplines, unless their elite schools are N-1, N-2 in terms of what they actually know, to churn out state-of-the-art motivated coders. But if you get that high school, that college sophomore, and they're basically learning how to be a coder and learning how to work through, I'm just making this up now, the University of Washington, but they're actually being taught by Amazon or by Microsoft or by companies in this room, then you've begun to get the type of quality control, ensure the state-of-the-art workplace socialization that's consistent with SIFT. It doesn't matter if the kid grew up in Mattapan or in Medford or in Wellesley Hills. So what we have to do as a cluster of technology companies in Massachusetts is work with the state to get more flexibility on these issues, and also very importantly use the curves where rich white guys get their way legislatively. Okay, so let's broaden that to tech executives get their way legislatively, to start putting pressure on the administration, reform Title IV, make EQUIP an integral part, or some successor program, integral to the way we think about post-secondary education. That's the only way we're going to get more quality capacity into the system fast. There were 3,500 post-secondary institutions granting degrees 30 years ago. There are 3,500 today. And it's about 90% holdover rate. A few have shut and a few have opened, mostly for profit. Okay, so as you can see, this is a very rich field, touches on all sorts of areas. I just wanted to give you an overview, but the number one thing I want to say to you, you got to own it. Because if you wait to play the merchant market it's not the market's not going to clear because there's not going to be enough supply. As employers and as citizens, we have to work on the supply side. But as capitalists, if you want to win, you better figure out how to beat that market because it's going to be really, really competitive. So I'm going to stop and take any questions.
What do those imply for greater opportunities for, heaven forbid, liberal arts degrees, or a shift in the education that we're providing to technocrats to incorporate more liberal creative
Yes.
subjects?
The hybridization actually tends to, particularly in certain types of disciplines, actually tends to reward the liberal arts person because they will more likely be able to write coherently, present orally more coherently, be a better conversation partner. However, that is closely correlated with the competitiveness of the institution they went to. A English major from Wellesley College or from Princeton has a sufficient capacity to learn and to change and good enough sense of where he or she might excel, not to get themselves in the type of trouble that kids that go and major in arts and humanities, usually on some kind of Title IV financing at a non-competitive institution. The only major that's more likely, degree holding, you've earned a degree, the only major that is more likely to have you end up in a non-college level job, even though you have a college degree, that's worse than an arts and humanities degree. So it's the next to bottom, I don't know what that would be, is actually a non-quantitative business degree. Kids go to school so they can get a job and make money. And they say, I should take a business degree. But, I'm not really good at math, and I'm not a coder or anything. I'm not going to be an engineer. So I'll take public relations or marketing or organizational, management at a non-competitive school. And non-competitive, I don't mean all the kids that come out of there are going to be unemployed and hopeless, but you are 50% more likely to end up in a non-college job if you major in a non-quantitative business degree at a non-competitive institution than if you major in a quantitative business degree like accounting or finance. Another question? Yes, sir.
So where does the supply side of the market fail? If you're calling on business to basically
Right.
come in and solve the problem, there's a lot of capacity out there.
Yeah.
Why and how have they failed?
Yeah. Well, we're going to have waiters bring in lunch if you really want an answer to that. But two or three quick answers. The first is I do want to be clear about something. I want to echo something Jeff said earlier. We've got to do this out of absolute clear-eyed self-interest. This is not we're saving anybody other than ourselves, okay, as employers. Where have they failed? They fail because they have the wrong metrics. So it's matriculation and enrollment that counts, not graduation and employment in field of study. They fail because many of the academic institutions think about the outcome as creating an educated person, not an employable person. They fail because in many instances their curriculum is off the state of the art. In the junior college system particularly is a very, very important, or community college system, technical and career schools they're called. They hate it when I call them junior colleges, so I hope none of you are junior college educators. But the community college system is a particular epicenter for this. It's a huge number of the seats. And they tend to break into two categories. One that thinks their job is to get kids equipped to go to a four-year school. And the other half, things like South Carolina, Texas has a very interesting parallel systems where they have half of them are very employment and technically oriented versus Massachusetts where the junior colleges are mostly populated by academics who need to stay living in eastern Massachusetts and they didn't get tenure at Wheaton or Amherst or somewhere else, so now they're at UMass Dartmouth, and they're sincere educators. They want good things to happen for their, but they don't think about this population and what's going to get them into a position to form a household. We know what works in terms of the demographics of the population, which is if you get positive economic momentum in your life such that you can form an independent household, that's co-indicated with everything that's good. That's co-indicated with intact marriages, no engagement in the criminal justice system, non-substance abuse, children with two parents, who will actually do better economically and advance further in society, fulfilling the American dream for their parents. Another, yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Sophie.
Can you elaborate on how MOOCs, the
Yeah.
massive open online courses,
Yes.
like EDX,
Yeah.
that is trying to really make ubiquitous,
Yeah.
how that will impact?
Right.
on what-
So, question is, how will MOOCs or things like edX or HarvardX affect all this? Early innings. A lot of it, from an educational point of view, is borderline worthless because all that's been done is an automation of a course that was designed to be taught by a live person supported by a teaching assistant, who are presumably, now they're counting the votes at Harvard, presumably now unionized. We're getting some innovation there. But what we need, I think, for particularly the types of disciplines in the room, we know things like Khan Academy work for a focused question, right? Imagine your engagement through an equip type program is you're curating which of the MOOCs work. You're not just kind of going to edX or going to Coursera and letting the student troll around. You've looked at it. You know that's good. You know how to mix and match the components. You've created some. And there are quite a number of people who are trying to use technology to solve the skills problem. And in certain areas, pretty soon when we have better VR technology, you will be able to do like technical service training pretty effectively on a remote basis because the person's going to be sensing in 3 dimensions what they're doing. Yes? Yeah. They're basically, if you look at the distribution, they're basically 2 bumps in the distribution. The tail, when you get beyond 40,000, is very, very thin. There are almost no instances. There's the woman with a nursing degree that says I went to college and I ruined my life. She's a 6 sigma anomaly. The average debt for someone who finishes a 4-year degree is about $29,000. The average annual premium for a college grad's earnings over a non-college grad's earnings about $25,000. So those economics, hang on, I'm sorry, but you have to, the faucet came off in your hands, you just wanted a glass of water. So that's one big of the bumps. The other bump is $8,000 to $12,000 didn't get a degree. And those starting a 4-year degree, racking up something between $10,000 and $30,000 and never finishing, that's a death sentence.
Of the 3,500 universities,
Yeah.
granting degrees, do you have a sense of how many of those are only producing, having jobs for, say, 75% of their graduates?
That data doesn't get captured. That data doesn't get captured deliberately and cynically. But what we do know is we have good data on for example, non-payment of debt by level of graduation rate and level of Pell Grant or student loan, and it's just it's so discouraging and so disheartening because what you have is the people most likely to get caught up in this vortex are the kids that have to make have the hardest hill to climb to begin with. So there's a direct correlation between dropping out and ending up being delinquent on your loans and being a Pell Grant recipient. And schools with very high percentage of Pell Grant recipients have low graduation rates and high malemployment rates. And it's all just a system that unfortunately has tended to reinforce itself.
How do we get the parents involved?
Well, that's one of the great advantages many of us have. We're parents. Jeff mentioned his 2 Harvard PhDs. I feel like a piker. Only one of mine had a Harvard PhD. And my mother had a master's from Columbia, though. So I'm halfway there. I'm going to expand that to be how do you let parents or caregivers or the kids themselves or their siblings, and what is lacking is information. Colleges aren't obliged to post their 4-year graduation rate, their 5-year they're not obliged to post job placements by concentration. They're not obliged to measure job placement in field of study. And in fact, there is essentially a cartel in the post-secondary education system which doesn't want any of this stuff ever discussed. And fortunately, the engineering schools do pretty well, or somebody in academe who could make a mail bomb would have sent me one by now. Yes?
One more? Joe, thank you so much. This is great, really great insight. Can you talk about the impact of the gig economy on workforce development?
Yep.
Because these models of Uber and Handy
Right.
giving opportunities for our talent to go and work a couple of hours.
Right.
And then
You bet.
talk a little bit more about that.
This is the first thing we have to understand about the gig economy is there are about 27 million people in the United States now who say they work independently. Some of that is essentially off the books. That's personal care people and house care people and things like that. Only about 0.5% of jobs right now are related to the gig economy as the way Melissa just described it. The Ubers or Catalent down the road, formerly called Hourly Nerd, or Workday. Not Workday, Upwork. Almost got it right. And people who are basically have portfolios of Airbnbs. The big part of the gig economy is actually the Kelly services and the manpowers. That's almost 15 to 16% of the workforce, and that has grown at a remarkable rate because more and more companies don't want to go through the hassle of hiring people and replacing them and firing them and having some lawsuit against themselves if they can just lay it off on somebody else. So the kind of using contract workforces is actually the big part of the gig economy today. Now, Melissa made some characterizations about the attitudes of the type of worker that's going to come out of one of those 179 quite selective colleges that you want to hire, and her characterization is entirely right. What we know about them is they don't want to work for a place that they don't feel proud of, and they don't feel that place doesn't do some good. They don't want to put their expertise to work in a place which isn't highly respected in that area. So really great, I'm going to just pick some companies at random, really great data analytics people, they don't want to go work at Hasbro because they're like the zoo animal. They're the only person who knows anything about data analytics. They want to work at HubSpot or something. So they want to be able to, if you will, just bear with me for a second. Companies, including yours, I dare say, tend to think in a very traditional way about career paths. And essentially the old deal in work is to say to workers, we're going to describe to you, let's say we're a really good, effective employer, we're going to describe to you as articulate as we can what our career path looks like, and so you have a good sense of whether you want to go for it or not. You can make that work in your life, and it can't. Okay, no one died, go do something else. That career path for these most sought after workers, they're not going to accept that deal. They have a vision, particularly between the ages of 22 and 35, of the kind of life they want to live. And if you can cause the work you make available to them to be consistent with those ambitions, you're going to beat the market again. Now, why do they say 35? Because stuff happens, you know, like family formation, and you know, all of a sudden that kind of, what I really want to do is write code, but on a beach in Cyprus, doesn't work with a 4-year-old unless you're a Cypriot. So there are data that those things. By the way, if you look at how millennials describe, you know, what they want out of life, and go backwards in time and look at you read articles about that, it's much more rooted to what the macroeconomy was doing when they were between the ages of 14 and 20 than anything else. So late 60s, everyone was going to, you know, save the world and never do what their folks did, and, you know, do the Woodstock thing because everyone was growing up in prosperity and there were lots of jobs and everyone felt secure. And Carter administration, teenagers, man, they wanted a 9-to-5 job. And so, as much as Gen Xers is that where we are now? I can never keep, millennials are younger than Gen Xers. So I don't know who's going to be younger than millennials, but that tends to explain it. And, you know, idealistic 25-year-olds have had a lot in common probably since cave painting. I think we're out of time. So I'm going to be hanging around for lunch, and if anyone wants to chat about anything I said, thanks for your attention.